Hello, everyone, and welcome. Happy Friday. It is May 27th at 11 a.m. We are so excited to be here with you today. We are really looking forward to being able to discuss the challenges and opportunities that come with exploring one of our core equity opportunities, which has been identified as a guide to all of our work that we do here at All Aces Inc. My name is Dr. Atyia Martin. I'm the CEO of All Aces Inc. and really excited to have our guests with us today who are part of Team All Aces. We have with us business manager Tayla Andrè. We have with us Stephen Walker, who is our project and business and project manager. And we also were going to have Maddie Chism, one of our project managers, but unfortunately, she cannot be here with us today. She's not feeling well. So please send some good love and energy out into the universe for Maddie. Now, for today, we acknowledge and we understand that there has been so much tragedy in BIPOC communities. We understand that the dynamics of not addressing racism, sexism, classism, and other systems of oppression has real world consequences, especially as we recognize that too many BIPOC communities know this tragedy, which is completely and totally unnecessary and avoidable, but we know this with great intimacy. And what's striking is that for all of the recent public and organizational attention to diversity, equity, and inclusion, there's still so many people who haven't connected the dots. What's on the news and what's happening in our day-to-day lives aren't isolated incidents, but patterns. They're predictable patterns that we can collectively navigate through towards a way of living that values all human life equitably or equally. And so how do we get there? So today we're going to have a conversation that brings us closer to being able to connect those dots in real life. And so as we're thinking about the identities of our team and our ability to be positioned to talk more directly about what happened in Buffalo and how that happened, and what happened there impacted us on a personal level. Again, we don't want to gloss over the tragedy in Laguna Beach or recently in Uvalde, Texas. We want to make sure that we are able to speak to these systems of oppression that are very much at play in those deaths as well. What's important to note about the tragedy that happened in Laguna Beach was that as Asian and Asian Americans, those at Laguna Beach were vulnerable not only to the dynamics of oppression as they are expressed here in the United States, but also to the dynamics of oppression that existed in their particular cultural context, which we ourselves are not part of, and so we're not well positioned to discuss. We also want to acknowledge that one of our recent guests, Ekayete Bailey of the Force Marsh Group, or FMG, who has partnered with All Aces as a client, joined us to talk not too long ago about the importance of developing relationships between identity groups to advance racial equity. And you can view that episode on our website, on our YouTube channel. And we want to further acknowledge the events of Uvalde, Texas, which we're also not well positioned to discuss. If you'd like to contact your elected officials, please head to www.usa.gov/elected-officials, and we'll share that out with you as well. So with that said, and with me having introduced our guest today, I want to make sure we start with checking in and practicing collective care. And so I pose to the group, and I will go last, but I pose to the group, how are you doing today? And again, for real, how are you? And let's start with Stephen.
Thank you, Dr. Martin. Thank you, Taylor. Good morning to all of our viewers and listeners. Today I'm doing okay, and I say that with a lot of thought, just with everything that's gone on in the last week and a half. Being a father of two kids, so I'm navigating on both ends. Having to realize that we live in a time and age that going to the grocery store might not be as safe as it used to be, but also navigating the fact that I have, two kids that I got to send back to school, come next fall, and having to cope with that and co-parent, with their mother, and thinking like, is this really the best idea? As a parent, am I doing what's best for them? So to say that I'm doing okay, but I'm definitely trying to navigate and think through and really make best decisions of how to move.
Thank you for that, Stephen. And Tayla, how are you doing today, for real, for real? Tayla, you're muted.
Similar to Stephen, I have very mixed feelings. I feel like at this point I don't have language to identify all of my feelings. But I do have mixed feelings about a host of things that are currently on the table in regards to our youth, our political system, and just overall the machine that is America. I'm struggling to manage myself.
And so you're the way you're feeling right now is struggling to manage yourself.
Correct.
And what does that mean to you, struggling to manage yourself?
So I'm struggling to identify correct language. So I know my feelings, but to then translate those feelings into words that are not unintentionally harmful to others.
Mm-hmm. Thank you for that, being your vulnerability. And so for myself, how am I doing, for real, for real? I'm tired. And just as a baseline, and then kind of associated with these incidents, I think for me, I am unfortunately not surprised. I've been paying attention to the data, and with this, we're over 200 mass shootings in America just for this year. Last year, I believe we had over 400, and so these aren't one-off incidents. This is a pattern of behavior that seems to be becoming more of a viable outlet for folks who are lost, who have been potentially indoctrinated into ideas that seem like they're, for lack of better terms, viable options, as I mentioned, and ideas that are actually harmful, not just to the people they end up targeting, but harmful to all of us as a society. And so I think what I struggle with is how we react in ways that we're so shocked about these things when, again, this year alone, we've had over 200. And so the question for us becomes, what are we going to do about it? What is it that needs to change? Because it is a pattern. And just because the news doesn't pick up on all 200 and some odd shootings doesn't mean there aren't happening. We get exposed to the ones that feel, for lack of better terms, most sensational. And so I kind of am at a place where I feel like we're right in the same conversation that we were in 10 years ago, when there was, when we experienced kind of our first shooting at an elementary school, first mass shooting in that way, not the first shooting at an elementary school, but the first mass shooting intentionally going into an elementary school. And so I would like to, so for me, I guess I'm just feeling just disappointed, not surprised, just disappointed that here we are 10 years later, and we have not made much significant progress. In fact, it seems like we've gone backwards a little bit.
Yeah. Dr. Martin, if I could ask something real quick, what is the impact of that? Because as you were talking, it sounds like we're getting used to this, and because we're I don't want to say it's normalized, but like, there's that knee-jerk reaction isn't there the way it should be. Where does that kind of leave? Is that part of the problem as to why we're experiencing this?
No, I don't think so. I mean, I think there are tragic events that happen every single day. We don't get exposed to all of them. I don't think it's about having a knee-jerk reaction so much as swimming upstream to the root causes on why we keep having these types of incidents. Um, and what is it about our um, mainstream conversations we're having about these issues that are preventing us from getting to root causes and addressing them, the policy issues, the cultural issues in our society, as well as our individual roles and responsibilities in being able to better understand what racism is, how it works, and be able to understand how many people feel isolated, alone, and lost. And the fact that um, having we're in this space yet again for me is more about us not necessarily having the right conversations or in most instances the political will to address those root causes, and which kind of brings me to this piece around organizational responsibilities. And so for us as a team, we work with organizations and really looking at what are some of the ways that we can help them internally to address the challenges they're facing with racism so that we can get them on the track to advancing racial justice. And so for us, I'm curious, based on this conversation and how we've opened up with kind of acknowledging our emotions, our feelings around these, what's one thing that you want organizational leaders and decision makers to internalize and put into practice when incidents like Buffalo or Laguna Beach or Uvalde happen?
Tayla, if you don't mind, I will go first because I've been waiting for this question. And call it bias because it's what we do here at All Aces. But simply put, please acknowledge what happened. Be open, be willing to listen. And I can give an example. I met with a client yesterday, and as we always do, we always start with how are you doing for real, and I opened it that way, and the conversation that I was able to have with him helped everything else go so much smoother because I was able to see what his real feelings were and how he was really handling that day, and that helped the conversation move forward and how what we talked about and how he could feel a sense of comfort in just moving throughout his day because when something like that happens, everybody has a reaction. They might not show it to you. You might not see it outwardly, but there's something internally that's going on. And I think a lot of times, too often, that's just glossed over and said, okay, that happened, but we just got to get back to work. And, we have to do the next thing. And meanwhile, that whole time, employees and just people in general can't focus on the next thing because there's this massive thing that just happened and it hasn't been addressed or acknowledged. And so throughout the day, they're not really showing up as their best selves, and they can't. Why should they? Because they're still trying to navigate this thing that just rocked the world. So I think creating the space to be open and, as we say, be vulnerable and talk about it to help people actually move through it is something that like every organization in America and honestly, quite frankly, the world to do.
Mm-hmm. Thank you for that, Stephen. What about you, Tayla?
I would first like to inform that a mass shooting is anyone, if 20 people are shot and 4 people are killed, that's considered a mass shooting. So a mass shooting is 4 or more deaths. And so I first wanted to clarify that for people who were just like, we had how many? Second, I would like to also add to what Stephen said. I know what took place in Texas is fresh, right? And so we don't really have as much context as we do, like we do in Florida, where Florida was race driven, and that may hit home, particularly to some of your employees or to some of your colleagues differently. As a Black woman who may or may not feel, or Black man who may or not feel attacked all day, every day, especially at work, it's just an added layer of something to think about, as well as that was a young man. He was a teenager. But if this incident didn't happen, that would have been a grown man in someone's workplace. And so I think about it in the context of how many, we used to have the postal shootings, right? So before there was like school shootings, we had the postal shootings, like they just snapped. But people just don't snap. There's, compounds that take place, and going back to what Stephen said, like acknowledging, having conversations, leaving space or giving space for individuals to share how they're doing for real. And so, again, going back to the conflicted side of struggling, I struggle with the notion that institutions should have some form of counseling in place, because that's not their role, right? That's just an added layer me as the employer have to give to my employees. But I also can see how it can benefit an employer to have mentally healthy, or again, I'm struggling with my language, to not unintentionally hurt people, but to have employees that are more healthier because of the conversations that they're able to have at work.
So I'm going to do an and here, which is it is an organization's responsibility to create an environment where employees can thrive. And what we understand about people's ability to thrive, to the points both of you have made, is that if I am not feeling well, mentally or physically, then I can't show up to do my best work. And so as an organization, whether you're small or large, figuring out what's realistic, what can be done to support employees' overall well-being, including addressing your own internal issues. So that's not yet another thing that employees are also dealing with on top of these collective, potentially potentially traumatic events, right? Because these events aren't traumatic for everyone, but they're potentially traumatic. And so as we're thinking about opportunities for employers, there's a spectrum there, right? So everyone can't have counselors. There just aren't enough mental health clinicians or specialists who, can support everyone that needs help. But there are some things that are lower on the spectrum that every organization can do, which is to listen to your employees and hear what it is they're struggling with internally, because you actually have control over that as an organization. You can actually address those issues that people are struggling with every single day, from the microaggressions they experience from their colleagues to the policies that are in their way of being able to obtain promotions, or the practices that are in their ways of being able to get the kind of development they need to get promotions. Or the lack of training that leadership and managers tend to have. Again, they don't have the proper training to even be in leadership roles. They were just good at the thing that they were doing. And in absence of that professional and personal development, they too are causing harm to employees. They're causing harm to the organization. And so for us as organizations, businesses, nonprofits, government, to be able to own that responsibility, that this is the environment that you create, that you have control over, that you influence. And so no, you can't control whether or not there's a mass shooting, but you can control whether or not you're making things worse for your employees based on their day-to-day experience. And let me give you concrete concepts behind this. So there is this concept called institutional betrayal, which stems from this idea of betrayal trauma. So betrayal trauma is when you're in a situation, in a relationship where your livelihood or something that you depend on every single day is tied to a person, an organization, or in this instance, betrayal trauma is generally related to a person, like a parent, some other loved one that takes care of you, spouses, those types of things, where you're in an intimate relationship with this person and you are not able to just walk away and throw your hands up. And so the repetition of the betrayal creates a deeper and a different kind of trauma that people experience, and you're constantly being exposed to the trauma. So in an institutional setting, there's this concept of institutional betrayal, which basically takes that concept of how the individuals we depend on can cause that deep kind of trauma and transfers it over to institutions and says you as an organization can actually be traumatizing people in your organization. There are things that you are doing that are leading to these types of harmful experiences that have a deeper impact. And because employees generally can't just run away and kind of throw their hands up and be like, I don't need that paycheck, then we end up in a situation where there's this cyclical experience of harm. And the more employees are experiencing it, the more unengaged they become, the more they're constantly looking for other opportunities. So they might not be able to run out the door immediately, but they're looking for a way out, which has financial implications for organizations, right? It costs money when people walk out the door because now you got to pay to find some other person, whether you pay with time or, companies or people in the organization who do that job. You're going to pay in terms of once you get someone in the door, now you have to onboard them to be able to get to a place where they can perform at the same level of productivity as the person who left, which takes anywhere from, depending on the type of job, from 3 months to a year. So this has real implications that are associated with the sustainability, operations, and culture of every organization in our society. So I'm going to pause there and just say thank you for allowing me to go down that rabbit hole, but also want to pose to the audience as well this question of what's something, or at least one thing that you've learned about race and racism, and specifically racism, that has changed how you process or deal with racially charged incidents. What's one thing you've learned about racism that has changed how you process or deal with racially charged incidents? And so I think that for us, we should model for the audience what that means for us. And so, Stephen, Tayla, where are you with this? What's that one thing?
One of the things that I have learned being a part of All Aces, being surrounded by the work, is that people struggle with the ability to separate themselves from family members. And I say that, so a little context. I attended Birmingham Southern College, which is in Birmingham, Alabama. And a good friend of mine that I attended college with made a statement one time about, I would love to have you over, but my grandmother's outwardly racist. And I went throughout life for the next like 15 years thinking like, so was she secretly racist too? Because her grandmother's racist. And so she like, there's no way that your grandmother's outwardly racist and you're not at least internally racist. And then being in a part of the team All Aces and really understanding how the dynamics work as far as not just the ability of separating yourself from your family and having those hard conversations with your family. It sounds juvenile to say it out loud for the first time, but I've always thought my friend was really like, I was like, maybe she wanted to be my friend to prove she wasn't racist. And then just listening to Dr. Martin and learning from All Aces, I really learned that it's, how would she have had that conversation? You know, being a college student, how would she have navigated that space? Not with just her grandmother, but her parents as well. And then identifying, what does that mean for me as a young woman at the age of 21, 22 years old? And so to wrap up or to clarify, I once thought if everyone in your family was racist, so are you. But that's not realistic.
Stephen?
Thank you for that context. And now I'm over here thinking myself, have I thought the same thing in some way? And yeah, I have. So that's a great point. I'm glad you brought it up. For me, it's navigating and managing my emotional reaction, which typically with what happens, it's usually an angry one, if I'm being completely frank, and managing how I handle that when something like something happens, and that is something that I struggle with for a long time, because what else do you expect to happen when something bad happens, and it seemingly happens to people that look like you consistently, and then you hear the statements like, "Oh well, if they just would have done this," like, no, that it's not just a thing, and being able to understand that, what, people don't understand because they don't have those lived experiences, and so I can't necessarily hold it against them for thinking that, but I do at the same time have to separate and understand, like, this is the reality, and simply being angry about it does nothing to help or change the situation. And so now I think more of, okay, people are angry, but what are they angry at? Are they angry at the situation, or are they angry at the fact that it is something that's continuous in this revolving cycle? So understanding how to navigate that and kind of channel that anger into doing something about the situation instead of just hollering and being mad and and everything else that comes with that, walking around with a bad attitude, and now all of a sudden I'm the angry black guy, so it doesn't help at the end of the day. So I think there's a time and a place for all of that, and there is a time when that can be channeled, and there is a time to be upset, but it can't be the first thing, and it can't be the only thing that dictates how you move and react to situations.
Mm-hmm. Thank you for that, Stephen. And I think for me, it's focusing on the things that I have influence on, that align with my knowledge, my skills, and the spaces that I'm in. And so, kind of related to what you're saying, Stephen, really this idea that, I cannot stop mass shootings from happening. But what I can do is make sure that the work that I'm doing, which is in the space of racial justice, racial equity, racial justice, within the context of the workplace and DEI, but also in community, and that how I show up as an individual matters. It's not just about work I do with other people, because none of us are perfect, and we all have the infection of different ideas and expectations that come with the system of racism. And so for me, I don't expend a lot of energy on who's racist and who's not racist, because we all are infected with a lot of ideas that are flawed, with a lot of and thinking that is flawed, that then influences how we behave out in the world. And so the question becomes, what can I do to make sure that I am showing up in the way that I want to show up, not the way that the world has dictated to me I should show up, not the way that is common in certain corporate environments, that I show up as Atyia. And there's a quote that has really been helpful for me in this. And there are many quotes, but I'm picking this one because it's succinct. And it's from Carl Jung. For those who aren't familiar, he's a kind of one of the groundbreaking psychologists, foundational psychologists. And it's spelled Jung, not with a Y. And so one of the things, many things that he said, is that the world will ask you who you are. And if you don't know, the world will tell you.
Mm.
And so what we understand is that a lot of folks are dealing with the discrepancy between what the world expects of them, the fact that they're doing the things that the world expects of them, but they're still not making any progress. They're still not getting ahead. They're still not, quote unquote, achieving the American dream. And so the disconnect between the expectations we've put out there for people about, if you just work hard, if you just do these things, if you just lean into these middle class values, if you just, and then you fast forward and you see that we still, as a country, have predominantly people who are poor and working poor in our country. Like, most of us are poor and working class people in America. Mm-hmm. We don't want to be. Some of us think we're middle class, some of us think we're upper middle class, but we're really working poor. And we know that the amount of wealth that sits with even less than the 1%, I think it's like something like 0.5% of people in this country own 60% of the wealth in America. And that's the most recent numbers. And so that sets the stage for a lot of potential unhealthy responses, when no one has contextualized for you that that's not actually how the world works. You can work hard your whole life and not be rich. Like, that's a reality. Most of us work hard our whole lives and we're not rich. Or, people not valuing education. Well, 99.9% of us value education. Like, that's not a question, but we've been taught that some groups of people don't. And if they just did, then somehow they would be better off in our society. And what I would posit to people, or propose to folks, is that, what do you say? And let me be explicit. That context is usually applied to people of color, particularly Black people, and Latinx people. And so the question I would propose back to people is, well, how do you explain all the poor white people in America? Mm-hmm. They didn't work hard. They don't value education, right? That's not what this is about. This is about the fact that we live in a society that has a lot of broken systems and structures, and our deepening political divide, and I'm being explicit with political divide, is creating more and more illusions about what the problem is. We have people who are using social identities of folks, poor people, people of color, immigrants, as the reason that so many white people are struggling. And if I can put the problem on them, then you can't see the 0.1% of the population that has 60% of the wealth and who are making decisions that are impacting your ability to get a job, your ability to get healthcare, your ability to get the resources and support that you need, that you're paying taxes to get. Right. And so if I'm able to distract you with those things, then you aren't paying attention to all this other silliness that's happening behind the scene that has real harmful implications and impacts for all of us, but disproportionately for people of color and immigrants and other populations. And Tayla, I see you nodding. Get in there. What do you want to say?
Oh my gosh. Again, I've lived in Birmingham, Alabama, but this could be right here in Massachusetts, where it's like those Mexicans are stealing all the jobs. It's just like those jobs were there. Nobody wanted them. They applied. They got it. They're getting the work done. It has nothing. Were you going to apply for that job? Like, yes. I wanted you to say it louder for the people in the back.
What about you, Stephen?
No, I appreciate every time that you talk, because I'm just like, see, that she said what I wanted to say. It's so funny that you made the correlation about people judging, Black folk and not wanting education, but there's poor white folk out there too. So again, it's not always, and this is what I was talking about, separating the anger from what's happening and the racism. It's not always, you can't always just point to a specific person or group of people. This is a problem that affects everybody. And so that's where the thinking comes in. What is really going on? Because it's not just me that's affected. It's not just you, Dr. Martin, not you, just you, Tayla. There are a lot of people that are affected by a lot of different things. But as you said earlier, and alluded to Dr. Martin, we haven't swam upstream enough to see where the hole is in the dam and to fix it. And so I think we do that. And one thing that you always say, own your power. We all have our own power that we, a lot of times, I'm speaking to myself, I leave it on the table a lot. And until I have picked it up and said, you know what, I have the ability to do X, Y, and Z, progress isn't made. And so I feel, if we as a collective worry about us, I tell my kids all the time, mind the business that's yours. Take care of you first. And once you are in a position that you are stable and you can handle what you need to handle, then you can say, okay, so-and-so next door needs some help, or, my brother, whoever. But until you take care of yourself, how can you judge or tell anybody, oh, I don't think you're doing this right, or, you don't have this thought process. It's not possible. So I appreciate you, leading us down this road that we're on right now, because again, I just think it needs to be said. Take care of you first. Know what you got going on first. Own your own power, and then if you have some left over that you can help lead somebody else. And as far as organizationally, I think that's where it starts too. You can't tell your employees, oh, we're going to be racially equitable and we're worried about this, if you yourself as a leader of the organization don't live that lifestyle. Because everybody knows, because if you don't live it, well, why should I do it? Yeah, I'm a sports guy. I think a lot of people have seen the movie Remember the Titans. There's a scene in there where the two players are arguing, and this it was one of my favorite quotes, and he said, attitude reflects leadership, Captain. And so before you tell me that I need to do X, Y, and Z, you go live that first. And then by you leading by example, okay, now I'll buy into what you're saying and what you're doing. So I will digress there, but I appreciate it. Thank you for starting this off.
So I would like to digress, but stay on path, because I feel like a question that may come up that people are looking for answers and may not have proper leadership. And so, Dr. Martin, I ask you, when you say swim upstream and taking a look at the data, and I am not surprised because the data proves that, this is what happens and this is what else is going to happen. Can you kind of speak to that? Like, what does that mean? And swimming upstream to find the root of the cause, what could that look like for organizations to swim upstream?
Thank you for asking that question, Tayla. I'm going to answer your question and I'm going to share another quote. I'm on a quote streak today, so I'm just going to keep riding that wave. So I think the first thing is to acknowledge, for every organization, whether you're a business, nonprofit, or government, to acknowledge that no organization is perfect. Every organization exists on a spectrum of toxicity, which includes dysfunction, right? There's no perfect organization. So there's a level of humility involved to be able to fully engage in what it takes to swim upstream, right? So you have to have a level of humility and intestinal fortitude to hear the hard things that you're going to learn in this process. So the first piece is, do you really understand what your employees are going through? Do you really understand what your employees are going through? So everything from what was it like for them to be recruited into the organization? What was it like for them to go through the interview process? What was it like for them to be onboarded? What was it like for them to be a part of decision-making processes or connect with their colleagues in the organization to build relationships? What types of opportunities do they even have to have their voices heard in the organization? What types of development opportunities do they have? Are there managers or supervisors supporting them in the ways that they need to be supported? And for context, for folks who don't know, there have been several polls across a wide swath of organizations, especially really large multinational corporations, where folks have been asked the question about what is the most important impact or influence on your work, your daily work experience, and it's people supervisors. So what is it like for people to navigate with the supervisors they have? Are they getting the coaching that they need? Or do their supervisors spend time really giving them consistent feedback so that they can grow and develop? What is it like to try to get promoted in the organization? What is it like when people leave the organization, right? So there are all of these moments in the employee experience that we can learn from. But if we're not asking, we can't learn from it. And if we get the answers and we don't like what we see and we just tuck it in a drawer or tuck it in a folder on our computer, then ultimately we miss the opportunity to create the kind of organization that's going to be sustainable in this century, right? And so this isn't just about a nice thing to do. This is really about how we are able to understand the patterns of experiences of the most marginalized identities in our organization, even if your organization is predominantly white people or all white people. There are differences in experiences that folks are having that you need to look into to figure out what is going on and how to address those issues. So swimming upstream requires us to have this baseline foundation of relationship interactions, whether it's through surveys, focus groups, all of these different avenues that we can take to be able to understand what that employee experience is, where it's breaking down for people, and going to think about, instead of thinking about what's wrong with the person who experiences it, looking at what is it that we as an organization can do to change the dynamics, the environment that people are in that are facilitating these experiences. So you can't get there without, and by there I mean swimming upstream, without going through this full process and being open to addressing the issues that show up, which means you're going to have to prioritize. Can't do everything at once. So our ability to do that in an organization requires a leadership to be fully on board for it to go well, because we've been in situations with clients where they say they want to do this work. We get to a place where, all right, now we've swum upstream and here's what we found up there. And here are all the opportunities to address them. And people realize that they didn't know that this is what the work was, right? And again, I want to be really explicit about this point before I move on, which is the experiences that people of color or BIPOC folks, that people who are immigrants, that women, that people with disabilities and other marginalized identities or underestimated identities have in the workplace are symptoms of larger issues. Where there is smoke, there's fire. And the larger issues they're a symptom of are where there are systems and structures that are broken. So if you are trying to go for justice and really getting to, again, the root cause, that's what it takes. is it will bring you to a place where you actually have to do some major restructuring, because it's actually not working for most people in the organization. It's just worse for those people, right? That's why it's so important to do this work, because if you want to be able to continue to recruit employees, continue to keep the employees that you have, what people are really looking for, and research tells us this time and time again, what people are really looking for is a place where they can show up and do their best work. They're looking for a place that's going to appreciate the work that they're doing. They're looking for places where they're supported. This is what people want. And if we can't figure out how to respect the complexity and the reality and the organizational responsibility that we have not to perpetrate institutional betrayal on our employees or continue to perpetuate it, then this is what it takes. So thank you for asking that question, Tayla. And the quote I was going to share with you that's related to what you were saying, Stephen, it's a little bit long, but this one I think is particularly relevant. So Theodore Roosevelt is quoted as saying, "It is not the critic who counts, not the person," changing man to person, y'all, just in case someone knows this quote. "It's not the critic who counts, not the person who points out how the strong person stumbles, or where the doer of deeds could have done them better. The credit belongs to the person who is actually in the arena, whose face is marred by dust and sweat and blood, who drives valiantly, who errs, who comes short again and again, because there is no effort without error and shortcoming. But who does actually strive to do the deeds? Who knows great enthusiasms, the great devotions, who spends themselves in a worthy cause, who at the best knows in the end the triumph of high achievement, and who at the worst, if they fail, at least fails while daring greatly, so that their place shall never be with those cold and timid souls who never know victory nor defeat." So this work, we can thank Teddy Roosevelt for that, but this work really requires a level of, I'm going to keep using the phrase, intestinal fortitude and humility, to be able to not be afraid to trip up, mess up. This is not a perfect process. It's not an algorithm. Just like everything else in the world, it's complex. And with complexity comes the potential to fail. But to keep putting that work in, and to always look at what you're doing, what you can do to contribute, and not only be looking at what everybody else needs to be doing, because then you have taken your eye off of the greatest opportunity to have impact, which is yourself. So that said, any responses to that?
So if I heard you correctly, Dr. Moore, what I'm hearing you say is, number one, structure and process. Structure and process. People need to understand that in order to get over here, you have to do this part here, because it'll be like building a house with no foundation. Yeah, the walls are nice, the roof is cool, but if it's not standing on anything, it's all going to fall apart anyway. And number two, what you're also saying is, my God, we're human beings and we're going to make mistakes, and that might be okay.
I need to give a little context here, because I don't think you guys understand that our name should be changed to structure and process. Like, it shouldn't even be all aces. It should be structure and process, because that is the topic of every meeting all of the time. If you don't have any structure, you don't have any process, you're not going to get the progress. And so if you know Dr. Martin, you know that is her favorite middle name.
Dr. Atyia Structure and Process Martin. That we need to change your name right now. Put that in quotes.
Thank you. I own that, and we'll take that title and change of middle name.
Turn it into a book.
There you go. Another one.
Okay, we'll add that to the list. And so, up to this point, as we wrap up in our last 10 minutes, we've talked about opportunity, like how we navigate these issues, where our organizations have the opportunity to address these issues. And by these issues, I mean these mass shootings, how they're impacting people in the organization, and even talked about swimming upstream to root causes and what that looks and feels like. So I want to land in a place where we're kind of forward looking, right? Thinking about the future. And so if you could fast forward to a year from now, what's one clear benefit you'll be experiencing from knowing more about the dynamics of racism and how it operates, especially when there are racially charged incidents in the news? So, what's one clear benefit for you in being able to have the strategies and approach that you have in place that a year from now will show clear benefit?
Mm-hmm. So, Stephen, I'd love to take a stab at this one first. For me, it absolutely would be Stephen's first answer, which is, but what are you going to do about it? That is something that is, a second thought for me at this time. And I would love for a year from now for that to be my first thought, for me not to react, and for me not to be emotional, but for me to like automatically just say, okay, this thing happened, but what are you going to do about it? And so that's where I would like to be a year from now. And not just when these type of incidents take place, but when anything in my life takes place.
Mm-hmm. Thank you for that, Tayla. What about you, Stephen?
Yeah, that's. I would have to second that. I'm going to add a little bit to that, and I'm going to add my own thought. Being able to think, okay, what are you going to do about it? And I say that because last week my son had his middle school tour, and it was a good time. And then the next day, the school shooting happened. And one of the first things I said was, when the time comes for the parents to meet the teachers and tour the school, I said we need to go to that. We need to have questions ready right off the bat of, okay, how do we prevent this from happening here? And that was one of the first things I did. So I'm happy to say that I can start to turn the page on that a little bit, as far as not having just the initial emotional reaction and outburst, but thinking, okay, I know this happened, but how do we get this? How do we not have this happen again? And then, secondly, being somebody that is able to help put things in place for when these things happen, for the blowback to not be as bad, because blowback is still going to be there. There's still going to be all the horrible things, but helping to be in a position of like, it's bad, but it's not as bad as it could be, if that makes sense. So being able to kind of have a wall, some barrier already in place, so that people are able to be better take care of.
Thank you so much for that, Stephen. I think for me, it's that I'm able to share more of what I have learned and experienced in kind of living and swimming in the waters of like how racism works, what it means to our collective well-being. And why by collective well-being, I mean white people and BIPOC folks. And if people didn't understand what I was saying earlier, I want to be explicit about this, that racism hurts BIPOC folks in ways that we oftentimes talk about, right? It also is harmful to white people, which is what I was getting at earlier. right? It sets a standard of expectation that somehow you should just be in a better situation than these other folks, that folks will put a target on for you. And those people that we put a target on evolve over the years. It used to be, the Irish and Italians, and it still is Black folks, Native Americans. So we put targets on different folks, and it distracts away from the harm that is being caused to all of us, right? So the ability to swim upstream, in the ways that we described it, whether it's for organization or collectively as a society, really is about improving things for all of us. Because the signs and symptoms of where we have dysfunction and toxicity are going to present themselves in a very visceral and patterned way when you look at the most marginalized identities in our society. You want to know what the problems are? Look at where you see the biggest inequities in our society. And I would challenge that those biggest inequities are problematic for all people in America, but significantly worse for marginalized identities. And the really interesting thing about racism is what it does is it allows us to pretend that we live in a world where somehow my problems and the issues that I'm dealing with is separate from the problems that you're dealing with, when we live in one society with the same policies, the same practices, the same environment. And so our ability to see that the harm that is being caused to all of us, including white people, and being able to choose who we want to be. So I'll go back to the quote that I started with from Carl Jung, which is, the world will ask you who you are. The world will ask you who you are. And if you don't know, the world will tell you. And that's what's happened to a lot of white people. The world has told you who you're supposed to be. They didn't say because you're white. They it was kind of under the surface, right? American, human, a citizen,
patriot,
like all of the language that really is, you as the default American white person, that somehow you have to be these ways. And if you're not these ways, then you won't get the benefits of what society has to offer you. The problem is those benefits don't really exist in the ways that folks expect them to. It's just enough to keep you holding on to living into these ideals and into the behavior that is expected of you. But it doesn't actually lead to any substantial benefits. Otherwise, we wouldn't see so many poor white people. We wouldn't see so many white people struggling, who feel left out, right? So that's not people of color's fault. That's not immigrants' fault. That's not all these other marginalized identities' fault. These are policies and decisions that folks that we thought we could trust made and are now on our doorstep, and it has been disguised in the mask of these other people's identities. But ultimately, it is not those people who are at the root cause of it. And so our ability to reconcile with that for white people, but also for us as people of color, for us to recognize that we have not caused all of this, that the ideal for us is not to try to become more white. The idea for us is to also try to figure out, who are you? Who do you want to be? What are the possibilities? And to support each other in doing that, instead of falling into the trap of competition of there can only be one exceptional person of color, one exceptional woman, or one exceptional fill in the blank. That for us, that we are able to see that we are these identities are a part of us, but that's not who we are. And we need to figure out who we are so that we can show up in the ways. And figuring out is about deciding. You have to decide and lean into it. How we show up in the workplace, the red lines that we draw for ourselves that say, this is not acceptable treatment of me. I am not trying to teach white people about racism. What I'm trying to do is teach people how to interact with me as a human being. There are some red lines. There are things that will not be tolerated And we have to be clear about that. We have to be clear about what we're willing to risk in the pursuit of having freedom and being respected as human beings. So I thank you all for joining us today. It is noon. We have gone through a whole hour together. We appreciate all of you sending so much hope, love, and intentional action to each and every one of you. And looking forward to seeing you on intentionallyact.com and engaging with us as Team All Aces to learn more, to be a part of a community where you can bring your whole self, even if you're still exploring what that is. Join us in the exploration and the lifelong journey. We appreciate you, and we'll see you soon. Intentionallyact.com, y'all. Thank you very much.
See everybody. Be safe, stay healthy.